to have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. How are you
So
doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, dude, fantastic. And enjoying this journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and to the fullest extent. And that means a lot of work too, but it's good work, so it's fun.
Yeah, you seem to be keeping extremely busy. The last time we spoke was, I think, the Value of Bitcoin conference, I believe. And
I think so.
since then I've been keeping an eye on some of the stuff you've been doing, and yeah, you're nonstop sharpening the tools, as you call it, sharpening the weapons.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have to, right? This is quite a tremendous situation that we're in, and we got to defend ourselves. So we got to have the good tools at our disposals to defend our property and what we claim that is ours. So Bitcoin, of course, first and foremost, is a prime weapon to use in this. But of course, there are subsequent, more niche strategies to deploy in tools to.
You still there, Max?
Yes, yes, yes.
There seems to be a bit of lag when you mute and unmute your mic. Is it possible just to leave it open the whole time?
Okay, can do.
Yeah. Yeah, so we spoke. I think that conference was in May. How disruptive has the intervening months been for you?
Oh, quite a lot since May. All the stuff that has happened. I think Wasabi or is still one of my main focuses, and it's something that has thrived in the last couple months. Specifically, I would say, well, the code base has just stayed rather stable, and there have been many like small refactorings and improvements and test cases and stuff to it. No new major like development on that front. However, what we are still doing is researching wabi-sabi, which is a novel coin join protocol using some fancy cryptographic magic to make it work. And this research has been going quite well for the last year. And specifically recently, we've proposed like the cryptography that we use in this protocol to the Bitcoin Dev mailing list with the applied use case of CoinJoin. And that was had quite a good feedback and thorough peer review, which was great. Um, and now we're continuing further research on transaction structures and other nuances like this. But it's very compelling.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like it, and I think I rely on people like you that are so deep into this stuff to kind of update me on the state of the product, the tech, the service, and that kind of stuff. What's been, other than that, what's been on your mind the most since we last spoke? Whether it be related to Bitcoin or anything else.
Yeah, I've been more and more like struggling with resource allocation, right? Where should I spend my time on? What is the most productive task that I could possibly follow? And that's a question that every entrepreneur ought to ask himself. And it's a very, very difficult question to answer, to be honest. And this was something that is specifically in the last couple months was a bit challenging. Um, so because specifically over the last 3 years almost, I've been using Wasabi Wallet, or back then Hidden Wallet, and almost for the same time, I've contributed back to the project in some shape or form. And specifically, the last 1 year have been very intense with contributions. For example, just on the code level, although I'm not a developer, I put on GitHub the notifications on the code base. So I get every single action that is happening there, every pull request, every issue, every comment I could see and read. And that was so awesome because it gave me such a unique insight into the overarching project. And I got to closer understand the people working on there and why they're working on it and what drives them and what they like to build. And that was super rewarding work. Just because, well, all of these individuals are heroes working on Wasabi, and they do incredible work. And it's just fun to be part of that, and very meaningful too. But recently, I just realized that was getting too much. By now, we have, I think, 17 full-time developers working on the code base that just CK Snacks hires. I think in total over 60 contributors to the code base. It's just getting too much to follow everything. So I questioned if that was still a valuable investment of my time, to try to keep up with all the happenings on GitHub, because I love doing it. It just gives me such a nice overview of the Wasabi project, but it took away so many blocks per day that it was just difficult to justify.
Mm. And what else have you been working on? Like what, you say it's been taking up maybe a little bit too much time now. What are some of the things that you've been wanting to devote attention to?
Continuing research, that is for sure. I think that is something that I personally like to do, and I think I'm decently good at it. Just because I can, fall down the rabbit hole further in all these niches and try to connect them. So that's work that I really love to do. And the other main pillar is education. So this is something that is really close to me and that I really like doing actually. And again, I think is meaningful work. And this is something where we'll focus on. And specifically here, actually, I've kind of been playing with the idea of writing a book. There is it's like been forming up in my mind over the last couple years, and I've written on different subjects in different places. But I would really enjoy to write this long form, fundamental praxeological treatise that very well defines first arguments and axiomatic assumptions, and then later builds a logically sound and reasonable model on top, specifically with the application on privacy, and how that comes into individual lives and into individual liberty. That's something that has fascinated me for so long, and where I think I have some interesting things to say.
Man, I would love to read that. What's is it just a time issue right now, or what's the holdup?
Yeah, that's really one of the things, right? Resource allocation. Is it a worth investment of my time? I mean, it's going to take a while, probably a year until it's at a suitable point. At least probably if it's at a couple hundred pages, and that then includes peer review and maintenance and all of this. It's for sure a work, but it's something that I really enjoy doing. I've started the Wasabi documentation a year ago and was maintaining this. And this is basically a book by now. I mean, if you would print it, it has hundreds of pages, again, with 30 contributors to the documentation. It's a huge archive of knowledge, and it's been so much fun to write it, but again, quite a lot of work too. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's a profitable allocation of my time because stacking stats is nice. So I got to see how to make it profitable.
And I noticed, part of the work you do, you kind of like you tender out, not tender out, but you let the community know like a piece of work that you'd like to work on, for example, and then you see what kind of donations come in for that piece of work specifically, right? Or something thereabouts. Can you kind of explain how you've been, uh, stacking sats by doing this type of work?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a super important aspect, because contributing to free software is utmost delightful, but it has to be profitable. Otherwise, individuals won't do it, and that includes a monetary reward. It's not limited to that, right? So for sure, just the positive feedback and the encouragement and all of that you get from others is nice. Um, Further, and actually most importantly, this is the reason, or how I always chose which projects to work on, and that is that it ought to be a tool that I use personally for myself, something that I really want to have, and something that I see problems with, and where I know exactly how to make it better. And this, like, to scratch my own itch, basically the free software ethos. This is what I applied in my decision making process of what to work on, because then even if you don't get any monetary reward, even if you don't get any outside positive feedback from others, uh, because you have still built that tool that you are using yourself, and that you are making as good as possible for yourself as an individual, that then has already been a profitable choice. So this was one of my fundamental guidelines on choosing what to work on.
Hmm. And so people, like when you advertise, or not advertise that, when you post that, then people can decide if they think that's a worthwhile thing to be worked on by you, and they can support you that way, right?
So I mean, it's a bit difficult to do that type of work that I do to make it a profitable venture, because fundamentally education to a big extent is about sharing knowledge,
Hmm.
right? And I'm a free software enthusiast based on first principles, right? Information is not scarce. There is no potential rivalry of who can control and use and enjoy the benefits of information. No, it can be copied, it can be shared, it longs to be free, it will be gossiped by others and built upon by others. And I want to use this to the greatest extent. So all of my, or most of my work is published under free licenses of MIT or Creative Commons, and this means that I can't really, sell information per se, because it is non-scarce. There's no need to resource allocate. Um, However, for me, what I found more interesting was that I could basically sell my time, my labor, my
Right.
attention, my skill, and that both to individuals who would like to receive, for example, tailor-made education, right? So you realize that Bitcoin is a crazy rabbit hole, like completely insane, and you could go in 100 different possible directions. Um, but that service of curation, basically, of having gone through it and knowing what to look out for and interesting paths to go down, and to be there to answer questions, right, and to create tailor-made content based on that individual who has a specific question. This is a scarce resource, my time, my attention, my skills, that I can apply on that marketplace and actually exchange for precious Bitcoin.
Mhm.
So that part of, let's say, consulting on both, Bitcoin basic ideas, or more advanced concepts, or praxeological studies and entrepreneurial strategies, for example. These are some of my strengths that I can, share my skill with others in exchange.
Mhm. When we spoke in May, Max, the crisis was underway, but we're several months. The clock wound forward at this point. Um, how has this just kind of shaped or influenced your thinking over the last few months, if at all?
Fundamentally, not much, because I've had a rather solid stance throughout this entire ordeal based on the first principles that I've carefully chosen and very rigorously defined. And these principles of individuality, first and foremost, um, did, did not get shaken during this. Individuals are free creatures who have the power to define what is theirs and to claim their own property, and the power to execute that claim and to defend it. And there are attackers who try to break the property of other individuals, trying to appropriate resources by theft instead of voluntary and consensual action. And this is a dichotomy that is, well, inherent to human action. Both acts are possible: the economic means of voluntary interaction, mutual beneficial gain, and the political means of coercive action and zero-sum games with one winner and one loser. Um, these are all possible, and thus individuals do it. So there's nothing new now. Just that the looter and the aggressor uses the excuse of a virus to dictate what individuals ought to do with their property, and to punish them if they dare to defy him, and to use what's rightfully theirs in a different way than he sees fit. This is nothing new. This time it manifests, of course, with freedom of travel. So individuals are strongly restricted where they can move. That goes as far as house arrests, right? How many people have been imprisoned by their state tyranny during this lockdown for some bogus reasons, which even the reasons are fundamentally flawed.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess that leads in, and I want to. I've always got lots to talk to you about, but I want to make sure we cover, one of the reasons we're speaking today, and what you just said kind of leads into the upcoming Congress, right? And so, maybe for people that aren't familiar with this upcoming event, you could inform everybody what it's about and some of the details.
Yeah, so the Hackers Congress is now in its seventh year. So this all started in 2014, and it's a prime event in Prague, a beautiful city in the heart of Europe. And here, a group of individuals got together in 2014 to build the Parallelly Polis, which is a place, a gathering of individuals that is based on an older idea from 1978, where Czechoslovakia was still in tyranny under the Soviet Empire. And here, the idea of living in a parallel society was articulated and refined as a strategy. To still have that front where you send your kids to government dictated school, or where you go to the party meetings during the day, but where at night, in hidden in privacy, without revealing yourself to the bureaucrats, you meet in your neighbor's living room, and you sing and you dance and you make music that is not on the propaganda allowed list, and you live free and you express yourself and you trade and you do your business, and this aspect of building a parallel society despite being in a tyrannical system is what the parallel polis concept and strategy is about. And this is why I think that it is so compelling in today's age, because as we see, the digital totality, which is the theme of this year's Hackers Congress, is precisely tyrannizing every single individual on this globe right now, and we have to use tools of defense and weapons to stop this and to protect what is rightfully ours.
And so the Congress is going to be a multiple day event on the weekend, right? I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Is that right?
Precisely,
Yeah.
October the 2nd till 4th.
And it's just a slew of talks, workshops, interviews with people in all related fields of privacy, of sovereignty, of cryptography, Bitcoin. I know the seasteaders are talking. So give me a little bit of an idea of like what kind of people are going to be, or what for attendees, what kind of benefit to be derived from it, from in attending the Congress, the conference.
I
Sorry.
think you actually summed it up perfectly, because the Hackers Congress is not a Bitcoin Congress, right? It's a crypto anarchy Congress. It's a technology Congress. It's a Hackers Congress, literally. And this is for individuals who understand that there is a problem, who see that there is something very, very wrong going on, and for these individuals who seek tools and weapons to fix these problems, to make it right again, and to opt out to enter a parallel society of freedom coordination, where these aggressive tactics of the state are no longer embraced and utilized. So this is, for me, the reason why I love crypto anarchy so much is because it is a liberation strategy that actually works today, right now. Like, we can use these cutting edge technologies of cyberspace, encryption, secure communication, obviously Bitcoin. We can use these technologies today, so to live a very substantially more free life than with other strategies. And the Hackers Congress specifically is tailor-made for this knowledge to be understood and to be applied. For example, one of the prime parts is a 2-day workshop, an applied workshop for the sovereign individual, where there's a tailor-made curated content and that builds layers of defense for around individual property on basically an entire cyberspace, so to secure against this digital totality. And this applied knowledge, I think, is extremely valuable.
Hmm. Max, what's yeah, and I love the idea behind the Congress. I think it's great to gain access to an education around these resources that, as you said, kind of help you establish more sovereignty in your life, because that's the name of the game in the end. And there's probably a lot of tools and philosophies and other things that people might benefit from using, but just maybe they're not aware of, or maybe there's a learning curve that they've yet to tackle. And I think conferences like this are a great way of shedding light on those and starting people on the path toward integrating some of those solutions into their lives. Just to clarify, it's a in-person and a digital conference, right? Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. It's a hybrid of meat space and cyberspace. Inherently, the Congress was always in person, in meat space, in Prague, in the Parlanipolis Black Building, in the heart of the city. It's a beautiful place, by the way. If you're ever in Prague, come over. It's fantastic. I love it. And there was the huge Congress that housed, in the last year, I think 500 or 600 people. So it's a pretty big event. Though, of course, this year the tyrants are going extremely crazy, more than usual, which is not that uncommon, unfortunately. Uh, and there's restrict individual travel, and naturally individuals adapt and find solutions to this tyranny, and that is events in cyberspace. We've seen over these last couple months. Basically, these gatherings of individuals cannot be shut down, even though governments would love it to happen. But we route around these problems, and so will the Hackers Congress. So the
Nice.
entire 3 stages that are during the 2nd till 4th October will be live streamed on Hopin, which is a conferencing platform that, funnily, the Value of Bitcoin conference used, where we last spoke. And that's I think it was quite a useful platform that allows both the video access of speakers and participants, as well as nice chat groups and other networking features. So it's an interesting platform, and they will use it for the main event, which is 3 stages of fantastic talks, including the 2-day applied workshop for the sovereign individual. And tickets for this can be gotten at hcpp.zz, which is the website of the Hackers Congress at Parallel Nepolis.
Nice. Are you going to be there in person, or are you doing a digital presence?
I love the Hackers Congress, and Parallel Nepolis way too much to not be here in person. So I will be in Prague, and go all crazy around, because seriously, this is one of, if not the most valuable events that I was the last couple of years. And therefore, I am very much involved in well, both organizing and attending it.
Yeah, man, I was in Prague in 2018 in August, I think. I wish I'd known about those guys then. I would have stopped by and had a poke around for sure.
Oh, you would have loved the place. Or you will love the place. Absolutely, come by anytime.
Max, I think a lot of us, especially this year, I mean, I think you have always, just based on your philosophies, have probably been a little bit ahead of the curve in this respect. But, many of us in the Bitcoin space, I say this somewhat jokingly, but only somewhat. I'm serious about it too, in that we kind of, you stack sats, you hang out on Twitter, and you're part of the, uh, you're part of the fun and games that happen there. And you're kind of just waiting for the world to change, and maybe for the world to melt, depending on what your perspective is. But I feel like this year with the virus and everything, it kind of sobered everybody up a little bit to say, like, wow, this could happen sooner than expected, and it could be more disruptive than I may have given credit for. So I should probably start looking into all of these things related to how to establish and maintain a degree of, if not full, privacy and independence and sovereignty and all of these things, because it looks like we're heading into an era where there's going to be even more aggressive attempts at overcoming those things, at taking those things from us. So, from your perspective and your experience, what's been some of the tools, this goes from software to, tools in the real world or whatever, have you used to help you establish the level and type of sovereignty and freedom that you desire?
You know, as you said with that example, if you're just, quote unquote, just stacking sats, right, and just hoping that the world will change, I think that already that aspect is one of the most powerful weapons that individuals can utilize. Literally, to stack sats, that is the easiest, and it probably has one of the most important impacts. And the impact that it has is that it withdraws capital from the fiat empire. There is less capital being held in the fiat shitcoin, and that has multiple important outcomes. Mainly, there is less capital for the looters to steal. Every single shitcoin that you hold is a tool that the looters have to steal capital from you via increase of the money supply and the cantillon effect that follows from this. So every second that you hold fiat shitcoin, and even worse, when you demand to be paid in the fiat shitcoin and hold that revenue in the fiat shitcoin, that is capital that the looters can steal and that they can use to fund this war machine that is going on. In 1913, with the creation of the Federal Reserves all across the globe, basically, they were used to fund the war machine of the First and Second World War and the Cold War that followed, and the war that is still going on. So the more capital the fiat empire has available, the worse. And just the simple fact of demanding to be paid in Bitcoin and holding your wealth in Bitcoin depreciates the capital stock of our enemy. And it increases the capital stock of productive individuals who can now use this capital in a sound monetary economy. Right? So, quote unquote, just stacking sats is one of the most powerful weapons that individuals can use to withdraw their consent from the fiat empire and actively work on decreasing the amount of power that it has.
Totally agree. Totally agree. But I'm still curious for those people that, they're already doing that. What, and they want to try to shore up other areas and again, establish more privacy and freedom. What are some of your kind of go-to favorite tools for doing so?
I will have to say that the Cube's operating system might have been that piece of software that has impacted me to a very, very large extent other than Bitcoin. It is a beautiful operating system that is reasonably secure, as the slogan goes, and it relies on hyper compartmentalization. So instead of running one operating system and one computer on your hardware, you run a virtual machine network, basically, of multiple virtual machines with each their unique operating system and file types and so on, running in parallel and talking to each other in smart ways. And this has two major benefits. The main is security, meaning if you have a dedicated virtual machine to browse the internet and open random files, and that virtual machine is a different one to compare to the one where you have your password manager or the one where you store your emails, for example, then if you ever download a malicious PDF, it is the bad fuck up is in that one virtual machine where it happened, and it does not spill over to other virtual machines. And that is just a huge security benefit. Cubes really is monumental in that work. Still a lot potential. But where I like it even more is the productivity hack, because one of the side effects that is one of the major features of cubes is with this high compartmentalization, you can really set up your life in a modular way. So for example, for me right now, I'm talking to you through a disposable virtual machine that runs specifically the Chromium, the Chromium browser, which is best used for these Zoom or Jitsi interviews, and it still routes everything through Tor. So everything is routed through Tor, which is a very nice fact with the Unix virtual machine infrastructure. But fundamentally, right now, the virtual machine where I run my Twitter, this is the only place where I can access my Twitter credentials. This virtual machine right now is turned off. Same with the virtual machine that is my Signal or my password manager or my email client. All of these independent virtual machines are now shut down, meaning that my laptop right now at this point is only usable for this call, and I'm not being disturbed, and I can fully focus on this conversation. And that really is a huge productivity hack when it's very difficult for you to browse the Twitter feed.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that is a very useful productivity hack. Max, there's a lot, of course, election happening November. The world is going crazy about that at the moment, or at least many people are kicking up a fuss about it. And, this is kind of somewhat unrelated to our conversation, but I hear the word anarchy thrown around a lot lately. And it's always one of those words that I don't understand it very well, but I know that it's used in the wrong way in most mainstream uses of it. Your website Towards Liberty is a great resource for other resources that have shaped your thinking and also some of your thoughts on things. So I definitely direct people to it. But what I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is one of your one aspect of your underlying philosophy. Could you kind of explain it a little bit to myself, like to me and people listening who may not have a great understanding of it?
The concept of anarchy specifically, or
Yeah.
well, anarchy comes from the Greek, and it has the prefix "an," meaning without, or in the absence of, and the suffix "archon," meaning ruler or master. So this is a concept where there are no external rulers, no external masters over the individual, where the individual is the king of the kingdom of self. And this is a fundamental concept that results on the philosophy of individuality. So the first principle of anarchy is individuality. Individuals exist and they act, and they allocate scarce resources throughout time, and allocate them according to their own value judgments and individual preferences. And they are free in the sense that there is no other imposing over them on how they can allocate their time, their attention, their capital, their money, all of these resources. And in that aspect, they are free. That is a state of anarchy, a state of voluntary interaction, where individuals do not aggress against their private property, but rather respect that and build contracts based on voluntary consent and agreement.
Right. Um, and this, I'm sure you've read The Sovereign Individual, the book, and it kind of describes history as almost being, relegated to the technological dynamics around violence that, any given period is subject to. And, with a concept like anarchy, do you engage so passionately in, Bitcoin and related technologies to foster and, establish freedom because you feel like we may be able to establish somewhat of an anarchic organization of humans at this stage because of the technological tools we now have, or um, yeah, I mean, looking at kind of political dynamics, I know, of course, the existing paradigm is, just a complete shit show. But look, moving forward into the future, do you see us establishing, sovereignties with that principle underlying them?
Well, I do think that individuality is the underlying default assumption. At least I think it's a very reasonable assumption to make that individual exists, that individuals act. I think that this is useful
Mm,
to have as a starting point. And if you do, then the concepts of anarchy, of individual freedom, of property rights, of voluntary interaction and theft, and of beautiful economic models all follow logically, right? So if there's a general agreement that individuals exist, that is a useful thing, then basically everything else follows logically, and it is irrefutably provable. And this is where praxeology comes in, the science of human action, the science of individuals manifesting themselves in this world. And we can absolutely draw conclusions and scientific statements, building on top of this one assumptions that individuals act. And there are many very, very valuable insights to be gained, and useful, of course, too. It's not just theory. For me, because the theory is so solid, so sound, so true, I can apply it in my everyday life. In fact, after or once more gaining understanding of this theory, I can tweak my action and align my action to be more in frequency with this theory. And so far, this has been quite a prosperous approach in what in what to do, and the feedback and result of my action.
and so do you have any I want to be careful how I word this, but you kind of like social organization ambitions, or is it, do you see a world where, kind of everybody uh, follows a similar philosophy as you just espoused, and uses the tools available to establish them, and something organic emerges as a result? Basically, what I'm trying to get at, I know it's a convoluted way of getting to it, but I think a lot of us see the turmoil in the world today, and see that there's a shift underway, and maybe Bitcoin is at the center of that. Um, I'm kind of wondering what you think can or will follow that in terms of how we choose to interact, and if there's any formal organization around that.
Yeah, so a couple things here. I mean, again, I'm an individualist, meaning that I start first and foremost my analysis from the individual as a starting point, and this includes the individual in isolation, right? Robinson on a lonely island without any individual around. He still exists. He still acts. He still allocates his time and his attention and his natural resources that he has. And he uses these. So the theory is sound even for the isolated individual, but the theory is also sound for the interactive individual, for multiple individuals acting together and in accordance, and who are embracing that feedback loop of action and reaction. And this is, of course, very important to consider as well in the analysis, because and one of the end results that we see of free individuals interaction is mutual beneficial exchange, meaning that the individuals both estimate that they will be more happy after the action than they were before, right? That's when they do the trade, when it is mutual beneficial, than when it is a voluntary trade. And this aspect already is quite useful because it shows that we're actually creating value. We are building something. There was something here that there wasn't before. We have manifested something new, something delightful, something productive, and that is beautiful for me at least. So although I start with the individual, that aspect of division of labor and all the benefits that individuals gain from it are, of course, fundamentally important.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that will always have to be something that's, and for, just to be clear, I agree. I'm pressing because I'm wondering, in a world where more and more people feel this way, but in a world where there's also, extremely large forces that would seek to undermine that, will we always have to be kind of doing what we can to preserve our right and ability to act in that way? Or, is it possible that those things that might seek to oppress people who act in that way may dissolve away when, after some sort of event, like their, let's say their power, from that thing from which they derive their power is dissolved or is no longer useful? Or I'm kind of, I'm not articulating this well, but I really respect that philosophy and I agree with it in many ways. I'm just wondering if, I guess, if it's ever like going to be something that we see kind of across the world, or if it will always be these kind of pockets of people that are determined to preserve, their ability or freedom to act this way or to live in a certain way.
Well, I think it's a question of whether we are going to ever reach mass adoption, quote unquote, right? And I think that's an interesting question, both for freedom as and individuality as a first principle, but also, of course, for Bitcoin as a strategy and a tool to use and to defend those principles. So I think on two fronts here. I see, just based on historical analysis and current sentiment, that these aspects of individual freedom are only treasured by a subset of humans, or at least treasured to an extent that these individuals are willing to pay for it, that they are willing to invest their time and attention to actually defend themselves. And I think that is not as common in the general sentiment. And that is, of course, a shame, because it reduces the division of labor that we can benefit from in a free society, as more and more people just abate the state and decrease that capital out of the productive sector and into the hands of tyranny. So this is a huge shame. So we ought to increase the amount of people who value individual freedom as a core principle in general, right? That is the power of ideas, basically, to do that convincing work, and also for them to act free and to live free. But for me, both for freedom strategies and for Bitcoin specifically, I kind of gave up on mass adoption, and it's not a priority of mine. It's not something that I think is a meaningful metric for my success, on multiple reasons. Because first, I don't control it. like I cannot make other people make a decision. They need to do that themselves. So if that is the metric for my success, then my success is wholly dependent on others, and I think that's not a healthy metric then. And further, although there are some benefits, of course, when more individuals join the group, in the sense of privacy, the anonymity set increases, the crowd increases, the people who use this technology increases, and that in general will give me better defense of my property, because it is just more of the norm. It will be a bit more difficult, I think, to steal from everyone at a large scale. And as well, of course, because Bitcoin is a monetary good, as the demand for it increases, as more and more people demand to be paid in Bitcoin, this means that the value of it increases as well, or rather the value of the purchasing power that a certain amount of Bitcoin holds, right? What can you exchange it for? So these are all benefits that I have from mass adoption. But fundamentally, again, my principle or my end goal is to defend myself. And this is where I see the metric for my strategy. So if I can defend my own capital from the looters, and with Bitcoin, I can to a very, very successful degree, then I think it's a success. So for me, Bitcoin is a huge success because it is a phenomenal tool that I can use to protect myself. And even though not everyone on the planet uses it, I don't care. I can use it and I can carry the full benefits of it.
Mm-hmm. So is it, I mean, would it be fair to say, because I'm trying to dig at, and you did answer the question, so I don't want to suggest that you didn't, but I'm kind of getting at, like, when we, a lot of us in this space, well, everyone works hard, or a lot of people work hard at life, right? And oftentimes there's something pulling us forward, right? Call it ambition, call it a goal, call it, an image in your mind of what the future could be, whatever. And, that's part of the reason why you get up in the morning and put so much energy into something. For you, like, what is it that pulls you forward? Is it just the kind of further establishment of individual sovereignty and freedom? Like, you just want to keep not only upholding that, but refining it and optimizing and maximizing it? Is that, that thing that draws forth your energy, or is there something else?
And I think that's the starting point from where I draw my energy, but it's not the exclusive point. So, I'm an economist, I'm a praxeologist, and I think I understand economics and business cycle and capital allocation theory to a decent extent. And that's quite sad, actually, because I understand the fundamental fuck up that the last 100 years of fiat empire were. I mean, the amount of malinvestment and overconsumption that such a drastic increase of money supply and the following Cantillon effects and the squeezing and realigning of deep production stages, what that does, the amount of capital that is destroyed is devastating. It's absolutely devastating. Um, so for me, this is probably like that's the thing. Even right now in my state, right, I only earn Bitcoin, I only hold Bitcoin, and I spend Bitcoin in most places. um I'm defending myself to a huge degree, but still I'm suffering the consequences of 100 years of fiat regime that led to malinvestment and overconsumption and all the capital that was destroyed in that effort. And I'm still suffering from that, right? Because right now we don't yet have spaceships and all the other unseen that we could have, as Bastiat would say. And this is something where I'm still suffering a lot, and therefore I really, really want to fix that. I want to provide entrepreneurs with the tools so that they can make meaningful value judgments again, so that they can be productive in their resource allocation, and that they can have some support in the question of where should I allocate my time? What is the most important thing that I could do right now? That question, sound money solves that question. It's a tool to answer this question more easily and more precisely. And this is why it's so important for me, because I see the fucking gigantic, like unbelievably huge benefit that and capital and wealth that we can create when entrepreneurs are based on a sound monetary asset that they can use in this resource allocation. This is just such a monumental improvement to the current shitty situation, that it like that potential outcome, in the case that we succeed in that minor chance, that is such a huge positive outcome that it is worth for me to invest my time, my attention, and my money to build it further and to promote it further and to make Bitcoin thrive in that environment.
Well said. I've noticed amongst a lot of Bitcoiners and myself included that kind of the further you go down the rabbit hole, or maybe it's just a matter of how much time you spend in the space. I'm not exactly sure, but life, you tend to simplify your life, or a lot of people do. They tend to eliminate a lot of the noise of their life, whether that's material possessions or relationships that don't serve them, or changing occupations or whatever. You kind of distill your life down to the simple and the good. And not out of a matter of discipline, or not even just because you want to stack as many sats as possible, but because the that simplicity, or the kind of the truth of engaging in only those things that you believe are genuine and good. And I know those are very kind of vague definitions, but that seems to be fulfilling enough for myself and a lot of the people that I've been talking with lately. And what you were just articulating, I fully agree. It's an absolute tragedy how much capital has been destroyed by this system. And let's not forget, you destroy capital, you're destroying human time. You're destroying human life effectively by destroying capital. And but as you said, we should have spaceships right now, and if so much capital wasn't destroyed, we could have this presumably a far maybe more modern, or maybe more uh, complex, or more novelty in the world or in the universe, etc. But I'm just wondering, and obviously I'm for that, but I'm just wondering how you square the two in your mind, of kind of wanting this abundant, complex future, and to whatever degree your life has kind of been distilled down toward valuing, quote unquote, the simple life more than other things.
Yeah, I think here I had a tendency already before discovering Bitcoin of not consuming too much. I think I was showing quite a low time preference compared, with just having a high savings rate, and a low consumption rate, basically, and investing at an early stage and so on. Um, and this is for sure something, I think extremely important, right? Because it's that aspect of building something rather than consuming it, rather than letting someone else build it. You fix the problem yourself, and the aspect, as you said, accumulating capital means saving time, because more capital means more resources, better tools that you can use to achieve the same ends, um, uh, and even better ends, right? You can achieve something much, much more when you have more capital at your disposal, right? If you put just 1 hour of work in, it's going to be different than if you put 10 hours in, but you can achieve more in that more time if you have more capital available. And yeah, there's, like, as Freddy Pascal says, in the seen and the unseen. I mean, sure, we have a decent society right now, and everything is kind of somewhat working, but we don't even know what we're missing, right? There's so much potential, that was just closed, that was shut off, that was never manifested, just by the huge amount of theft that was going on, and that malinvestment and overconsumption that follows.
I agree, Max. And I know a lot of these questions are somewhat deep, but that's just the way it
That's
is. You
perfect.
you you bring
That's
them out
great.
of me.
Finally, a good conversation.
Does do you have, because, and I'm asking this question because I looked on your website, and under the natural law section, there's a section on Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Rosicrucianism and stuff. And I've been interested in the God question, I guess, my whole life, actually, but it's coming up in Bitcoin a lot lately, because people notice how much being involved in Bitcoin tends to influence the behavior of some people, of course not everybody, and kind of the zealotry associated with it, and it just how passionately people engage and support and believe in it. And a lot of the, to whatever degree the characteristics of Bitcoin imbue certain behaviors, or inspire certain behaviors in people, is an interesting question. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, I really appreciate and am interested in how articulate and detailed your philosophies are, and how you frame them and explain them, and from all appearances tend to live by them. And I'm just curious, is there an underlying, I hate the words, spirituality or uh, you know, supernatural guiding principle, something beyond just logic. Is there anything um, that, that you use to guide your life at all beyond logic and philosophy?
Yes, absolutely. And this is like something that was very important for me to work on and to try to discover, because there are, well, first of all, I know nothing. So there's so much uncertainty. There's so many open questions. That's why I'm always striving to accumulate more knowledge and to further refine my understanding of it. And that is such a huge passion of mine. Um, but to explain this is in a similar context as before. I said that individuality is my assumption, right? It is something that I cannot logically and reasonably explain and prove. How do I prove to myself that I exist? Right? That's a very difficult question, actually, and you're going to be in logical fallacies and circular logic very, very quickly.
Mm.
So for me, this is something that I actually assume. I cannot prove that I exist. And I realize that, and I take this as my one assumption. And on top of this one assumption, I can build a logical system on top, right? So because I exist, I act, and that means allocating scarce resources. And there's a potential of conflict, and there are property rights, and so on. All of this I can deduce logically from this one axiom. Same as, for example, in geometry, there's an axiom that two parallel lines never meet. You cannot prove that statement. It's like, try, good luck. But based on this assumption, you can build a logical, consistent model on top, right? And this is how mathematics works. And I apply that same thing. So again, I assume individuality and I build logically on top. And for me, what I build logically on top has, I mean, the definition of words is a bit tricky, but I think it has little to do with um, religion or spirituality, because again, it is logical. But for me, where that aspect of spirituality or curiosity comes in, is that aspect of where comes the assumption, right? Who actually manifests that individual? What is underneath that? What is behind that, right? This is the more, let's say, esoteric question, the more occulted question, that is so interesting to ask, and that leads you down extremely many beautiful rabbit holes.
Could you go down some of them for me?
Well, there's one aspect that the individual himself is the creator, right? Is the observer. Um, you exist and you observe yourself, right? And you realize that you are an individual existing, and that this is one point of consciousness. Every man and every woman is a star, as the Lemanites would say. This aspect that this existence is observable, and measurable to some extent, basically means that the individual is the creator himself, God himself, the architect himself, right? The fact that we speak, that we literally sing a manifestation into existence, just as, for example, in Tolkien's spiritual philosophy, the world was also sung, right? And humans speak, humans act, humans create. That creative aspect of creating something delightful, of manifesting value, that for me is a very like godly aspect, and that specifically that archetype of the entrepreneur, to allocate resources productively, so to create a lot of value, right? That is so heroic. That is so deeply. Well, I'm struggling to find the right word, because it's not spiritual, but it's it's something extremely special that goes further than some basic lower needs.
Fundamental, maybe, or
Yeah.
the creation of wealth.
Yes, exactly, and not just the creation, but also the creation of the universe, right?
Right.
So that entire aspect, is above so below, and if you create value on a small scale, right, by building a strong family, by building a healthy and productive business, and by being a positive partner and so on, all of these small value creations are tantamount and in parallel and in sync with that creation of the universe itself.
All acts of creation.
Yes,
Yeah.
in a sense. And that then also leads you down karma, basically, because there are always consequences to actions, right? Action is change. So there is a change in the situation before and after the action. And you can, before you make the act, you can make a judgment of how you think, how you estimate how your action is going to pay out. But you don't know, right? The future is uncertain. And after you have done the action, after you did that courageous step into the darkness, right, venturing out into the void, you can look back and you can reflect if your action was actually leading you to a state of less uneasiness, of less suffering, of more delight and happiness. And if yes, then you were productive. But if no, if your action was a mistake, then you will realize that too. So that aspect of karma, basically of cause and effect, and that inevitable law that follows here, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is quite an interesting, more spiritual topic too, that I think is very well reasonable.
Yeah, I agree. And so, I mean, obviously, to be able to draw from all of these different, call them religions, schools of thoughts, philosophies, whatever, uh, I imagine you spent some time, consulting them, and I find it a very interesting thing to do as well. Has something unique coalesced by spending your life up to this point, contemplating, or first of all, taking in all those different perspectives and all that wisdom from, whatever different source it may have come from, and then, digesting it yourself and coming up with something that orients your life? Has something unique been born there, or have you drawn on one thing more than another, or do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, for sure. And there's such a huge base of different theories and philosophies and schools of thought that I pull from, that it's very difficult to put a label on it.
Sure.
Because I mean, I do focus a lot on praxeology. That really is like my key methodological approach. Maybe too much in some extent. I think it can limit me in some aspects to always have that certain view, and approach. But that is for sure one of the focuses, and individuality, of course, in general. Though where I'm let's say where over the last couple of years I found the most success, or the most new insights, was in that aspect of finding actual liberation strategies that work today. So not just to philosophize and to talk about the theories, which is something that I love doing. As you can tell, I can blabber on for hours.
Please do, man. I love it too.
Oh, thanks. But I also like to do it, and to actually have results. And this is something where recently, specifically cypherpunk strategies, crypto anarchist philosophy is an applied philosophy, um, uh, were really, really valuable. And these are probably more well known. But one of the areas that is not so well known, but that was so monumental to my current understanding and to my current strategy, that is VONU, voluntary, not vulnerable, which is highly recommended to look into. This is something that in like the 1950s or 60s, a pseudonymous identity published under this name a bunch of writings and newsletters and publications, and discussions and books, in that realm of a freedom strategy that is very well defined, that has achievable metrics to it, and that is based on first solid principles, and that actually works. And that is this aspect of being voluntary, not vulnerable. So to increase the mean time of harassment, as Rayo, the pseudonymous identity, puts it. So the mean time to harassment is basically how long until you meet the cops again, the baludgies, as he calls them. So if you meet a baludgie on Wednesday and then you meet the next one on Saturday, then you had 4 days mean time till harassment. And so your goal as a sovereign individual is to increase that time, that mean time to harassment. Right, a year is better than 4 years, than 4 days. Or 5 years of not having interactions with bureaucrats is beautiful, right? That's fantastic. And these specific strategies that Rayo uses here in this principle are self-sufficiency, for one, right? So he makes the general observation that the majority of people are basically idiots and sheep, who don't care about their freedom and who are just going to put you in more danger to be stolen from. And that therefore, in general, it is advised to become more self-sufficient, right? To produce your own food, to know, like to build your own shelter, and all of these aspects, are important to be more sufficient, more sovereign, where you do not rely on outside trusted third parties. And the aspect of mobility was very, very important for him. So that you don't just live in one permanent house all the time where you're easily attributed to, but that you live a rather nomadic lifestyle. And as soon as someone tries to harass you, you just leave, right? You pack up and you vacate the space, and you have a very cheap defense against a potential cost. Rather than fighting and fist fighting, you just leave the place and never come back. And strategies like this, towards becoming vulnerable to coercion, is quite an interesting strategy for me that I've discovered.
Yeah. I think that's why, the original question, way back at the beginning of this conversation was, kind of what are some of the more effective tools you've been using to establish your sovereignty and your freedom? Because I sometimes wonder, like I totally love digging into all sorts of different philosophies and, blanket umbrella term religions and all sorts of mystery schools and stuff. Like I just find that interesting, but it does beg the question: is any of it relevant if it can't be implemented, right? If it has no implications in how you may live your life? And some of them obviously do, because some of them don't require the coordination or acquiescence or permission of the outside world, but some of them do. And so that's why I'm so interested, and why I like talking to you so much, because engaging in the technologies that are now becoming available in the world, a lot of them are enabling a lot of those concepts and ideas and um, perhaps ways of living that a lot of those things we may have read in the past espoused, but which may not have been practical, just given the state, the both kind of mega political conditions in conjunction with the technological tools available to establish those things. And I think we seem to be rapidly moving toward a circumstance where they are becoming available. And now it's just a matter of us taking the responsibility to actually engage in those things. And yes, it requires discipline and time and fumbling around and perhaps stepping outside your comfort zone to do. But I'm trying to carve out time to do it more, because realizing that that's like, it's all fine and well to think like you're some smart philosopher who likes studying whatever, but if you're not actually going to take the opportunity to actually establish some of those things that you deem desirable when they're right in front of you, then you're just full of shit, right? Like, you've actually got to put in the work to get them. And it seems to me that you're someone who's doing that, perhaps more than most people that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I focus on, because again, my end goal is to be a sovereign individual, right? To defend myself, my property, and my loved ones. And for this, I have to defend myself in general. And this requires action. I cannot be inactive. Then I'm just going to be stolen from all the time, right? And people will trample on top of me. So you have to make that claim and to stand strong in that claim of what you own, right? That this is your own individual responsibility. And maybe to tie on to one freedom strategy that I have personally found to be extremely successful, and that is nomadism, or more specifically vandalism, right? That aspect of being mobile, that is very well explained in Vonu or in TAS and Second Realm strategies. or even in parallelly polis strategies, as we talked about earlier, um, this has multiple awesome liberation effects. So first and foremost, it decreases your mean time to harassment. Right, when your neighbor gets annoyed that you play the music too loud, instead of him calling the cops because he's annoyed, you just leave and he calms down and nothing happens. Right, so you can de-escalate that spiral of conflict very early by and very cheaply by simply packing up and leaving. And I think that is quite an important and substantial way to yeah, to not even get into trouble in the first place, right? So this is a nice defense, very cheap. Um, and on the other aspect, when you actually are mobile, then your meat space location becomes a variable, right? If you no longer live in a brick and mortar house, that the same house that you grow up in and that you raise your family in and that you will die in, basically, then your meat space location is by default just always that same old house in that same old village, right? But if you are actually mobile, then you really have to ask yourself the question of where do you want to wake up tomorrow, right? Because you could go any place. Specifically, for example, if you just travel by a car or a truck in Europe, you could reach whole Europe, whole Asia, Russia, all that part. Even drive down to southern or to Africa if you pass with ferry through Spain. So the area that you could potentially drive through is huge. Same in America. If you have a RV in America, I mean, it's such a huge landmass, so many choices, so many options. And then the question really becomes, where do you want to wake up in? And also, with what other individuals do you want to interact with? Right? Because again, if you live in that same old village, then you only have these neighbors who've been there for 50 years, right? So you don't really have a choice on whom to collaborate with, on your peers in the division of labor. And just by the aspect of being nomadic, you can choose that need space location, and you can come to the people who you find most important to be around, who bring you the most delight, the most happiness, the most value, with whom you can grow your capital stock the most, right? And you can more fully engage in division of labor and outsource things and ask others to solve a problem for you. And this is in general quite a beautiful, beautiful approach. So that aspect in mobility was not just a great defense for my property, but it also increased the standard of my life simply by the fact that I could choose specifically with whom I want to have around me. And if I don't like a person, well, I leave and I no longer engage with them.
Yeah. You know, this, and I drove an RV around Europe for 4 months in 2018 in the summer, and so I can relate to a lot of the stuff you were just articulating. It's great, but I also yearn for a more settled life as well. But what you just said and I've been thinking about it lately, and we're in this. Sometimes it seems like we're in this big struggle for our own liberation and freedom and sovereignty, right? And I know people that are not so far down the Bitcoin rabbit hole might hear something like that and think, bro, what are you talking about? You live in the freest, most modern time ever. You've got it better than anyone who's ever lived. Like, what are you whining about? And I can appreciate that argument to a degree, but still, there's more freedom on the table, and there's definitely still oppression in various in various different forms. And I would like that not to be the case, right? As we've been discussing, I'd like to maximize freedom and sovereignty and liberation, and minimize the things that would detract from that. Um, but I asked myself, like, what would you do with freedom? Like, I try to answer that question almost as like a philosophical, uh, question to myself, to try to refine my thinking and try to orient myself uh, the way I, or orient myself properly. And I ask myself that a lot, because, like, we always, whether or not you're in some big struggle, or you just get up and go to a job that you don't really like every day, and come home and kind of live that monotonous life that you just found yourself in without too much effort. um, you know, if you take away the struggle, whatever your struggle might be, if you take away that thing that you kind of feel like you're fighting against, even though, it's not always a fight and there's enjoyment and stuff, like, what would you do with freedom is the question that I keep coming back to. And I'm wondering
It's such
what
an
the,
important question, right?
yeah.
So,
So what would you answer that question with?
it really is the most important question. What do you want? Right? What do you actually want to achieve? What if, what is the end goal that you want to reach? How do you want to improve your situation? Right? Again, the individual exists in a state of uneasiness. He's suffering. There's something that is not going well. Um, and that aspect of freedom, I think, comes twofold. First, it's to be free in being creative to come up with superior strategies, right? So you're suffering right now, and a free man can be creative and think of better alternatives. And even that aspect of hindering the individual to be that creative, to potentially think of better outcomes, is for me already a tyranny of individual freedom. And then the second aspect is after you've made all the value judgments on all these ends, then you ought to be free to use your own property, your own means, the capital at your disposal, so to achieve these ends that you deem most worthy. Right? So this is the second aspect, that you can actually use what is rightfully yours. You can apply your property and use it to whatever you deem necessary. And for you, that is what you that is going to bring you to that thing that you think is the most valuable to you, right? So you're going to apply it to whatever you want most. And for me, that is the freedom, right? So what would you do with freedom is really that fundamental question of what do you want? What
Mm,
do you actually want to achieve? And that is such a difficult question on many different layers. And it's, of course, unique to every individual and unique to every individual across each different point in time. Right? What you want today is very different than what you wanted 20 years ago. So this is so important, and this is what the entrepreneur does with resource allocation, right? What do you want? What do you want to build? Where do you want to invest your capital? This is the question that a entrepreneur asks himself constantly, and where the entrepreneur drives to find a meaningful judgment and estimation of what he actually wants, and then a clear strategy on how to reach that. And both of these aspects together is what make a free sovereign individual.
mm. And maybe freedom, because I do think it's very worthwhile to answer that question, because as you just articulated, it has very practical implications for how you direct your time. But maybe on another level, freedom is just an idea that you kind of ideal rather, that you can only ever strive for, right? Because you could make the case, how do, in an infinite universe, in an infinite imagination, you will always dream up restrictions of some kind, even if those restrictions are just ones of, adventure. I haven't seen fill in the blank yet. I haven't experienced yet. I haven't reached the other side of the galaxy or the universe or whatever yet. So, maybe freedom is just that ideal that like makes the striving continuously worthwhile, because there's something inherent about it that is uh that is that like
I,
ignites the soul almost.
yes, I totally get you, and I really think that that's the case. And again, the individual is suffering, right? And there's always something wrong, and there's always problems that the individual has. And one of the many problems will be theft, right? And that is something that individuals most likely will have to deal with forever, because there will always be assholes who want to have the stuff that you have, uh, and they will try to take it from you. So this aspect that there are, first of all, others stealing from you is always going to be a hindrance. But it can even be an involuntary trait, right? Just that aspect of holding a responsibility is burdensome, right? For example, you're like, okay, you want to have a family, right? You want to sustain that life and your generations for further futures. Um, and then of course, right, you take on that, or well, you make that happen, right? You have a lot of fun in bed and eventually babies come out. and and then you have achieved what you wanted, right? You've furthered on that generational blockchain basically, and forked one more time. And this, now in the next aspect though, you have to carry the responsibilities of that, right? Actions have consequences, and now this means that even though you did this voluntarily, there are still now burdens and restrictions. Right, it's all of a sudden a lot more difficult to go out partying every night when there's a kid at home, right? So these are all trade-offs and restrictions that individuals take on voluntarily, right? This is Atlas. He shoulders the burden and the responsibility and the suffering of the world, and he still acts, right? He still stands strong and holds upright. That is the individual who understands that he is in suffering, right? But that despite that does not give up, but actually shoulders that responsibility, finds a solution to problems, and acts and fixes problems. Right?
Mm.
That is the heroic character of Atlas, and the giant who holds the world.
Why do you think? Why do you? Why do you think that is the heroic character, or even why do you think we do that? Like, to the point about children, do we give up that degree of freedom that maybe we experienced prior to children for joy? Is that the trade? Freedom for joy, or is it something more? Is it something different?
No, I think you could call it joy or happiness. Um, Again, from a praxeological point of view, it's a priori value judgment, right? So you think that in a future situation where you have kids, you're better off than right now where you don't have kids, right? So this is a individual value judgment where the outcome of having kids is better than not having the kids, and this is fundamentally why it's done. So yes, it's done to achieve your individual happiness or your pleasure, or your satisfaction. And again, this is something that it cannot be observed or cannot be measured from the outside. This is something that is very subjective, and only to the eyes and the mind of the beholder.
Right. It's interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff.
Oh,
Because
we could blabber on about philosophy probably for hours.
yeah, well, sometimes, especially being in this space, and especially given our place and time, freedom is one of those big central, like, ideas that we're really striving for. But in the context of the example we just discussed, it's like, yeah, no, freedom is definitely one of the top priorities, but not exclusively, right? Like you're trying to, and this, as you just said, it's different for everybody, but you're trying to balance, freedom with joy, with et cetera, perhaps many different other things, and come to whatever synthesis of all those things that you, through some, inner process, deem the most ideal or beneficial or desirable for yourself, right? Rather than just exclusively maximize this criteria or that. Like, we're all kind of artists in how we, and how our preferences paint the situation that we construct for ourselves in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's all about individual choice and even individual choice in the face of tyranny, right? So, for example, let's go back to the Soviet Empire, where the parallel polis idea was born. One of the main reasons for this was artists, right? So artists were completely like subjugated, and they could not do art unless it was approved by the bureaucrats, and there was only propaganda being published. Um, but now you have a huge problem, right? Are you going to express yourself freely and write something that is anti-authoritarian, and try to publish that? Well, you're going to get thrown in the gulag, right? So I mean, great, sure, you can publish this and you can get out the message, but the consequences here that the tyrants are going to kill you, right? So even though you could live out freely for that short time of publishing the article and manifesting yourself to that fullest potential, because of the attacker, because of that risk model and the coercer and the tyrant in the picture, the consequences to such a free choice are going to be drastic, right? And therefore individuals are very likely not going to do such type of action. And this
Mm.
is where the parallel society comes in, right? All of a sudden you don't publish your free art under your government issued identity, but you sing a song that is anti-statist, and you perform it under a fake name with a fake mustache somewhere in a dirty pub underneath, right? That aspect of opting out and of not directly offending the persons in power, just as a strategy to still claim more freedom. Because fundamentally, even if if when you shut up and don't sing that free song on the main square, of course you're not free. You're being censored, but still you're more free than if you would be in the gulag. So it's again a rational choice to cave in, right, and to obey.
Right. And the internet is another form of the parallelini polis, right? I mean, it's where people
Yeah.
can go. It gives people a forum where now, again, I mean, you might call it. I know there's a lot of censorship on the internet, but let's just remove that for a moment. With the freedom comes a lot of the ugly parts too, right? People with the freedom of being anonymous on, let's say, Twitter, for example, they could be, far more horrible to other people than they would be face to face or in their family or social lives, right? So the freedom, it's like this parallel world where you can express whatever you want, and I think that's one of the redeeming qualities of the internet, or maybe one of the most important aspects of it, which is why I think people have an issue with this censorship. But I think because people desire it so much, it's probably part of the motivation for these technologies that are being developed to preserve privacy and to counter censorship and these sorts of things, because it is somewhat of a bastion of freedom in an exterior world that seems to be. Now, I don't know if this is just kind of like a short-term cycle rather than a long-term, because they, as has been said, can't remember who said it, but the arc of history bends toward freedom. But we certainly seem to be maybe in a micro bend away from that. And so I think the increasing relevance of the internet being a domain of freedom is perhaps we're moving into a period where it's more relevant. And yeah, I mean, lots of sci-fi movies based on that notion, I guess.
Oh yes, absolutely. No, the internet is a great enabler. It's a beautiful tool that individuals can use to express themselves freely. And if used properly, it's very difficult even to censor it. Sure, targeted attacks are possible, but there's layers of defense that will defend to a certain degree. So this is a beautiful way to engage with others and to express yourself and to reveal yourself to the world selectively, right? That aspect of privacy. And it's a huge enabler. It's a huge liberator, and I think it has been tremendously successful. Again, specifically because so sharing information on the praxeological sense means entrepreneurs help each other to improve their technologies, to improve their understanding on how to use tools and how to better allocate their capital and their time. Right. So the internet in that sense is so like a beautiful capitalist invention because it can be used by entrepreneurs to coordinate and to exchange information and to build deeper production stages basically, which is has tremendous benefit. And we see this to a huge just extent of with that aspect of having instant global communication, how much more interconnected the global monetary system has become, and that marketplace that this enables, specifically for services types, where if it's just talking or doing providing a labor task in cyberspace, literally the marketplace for that exchange of labor for money is incredibly liquid now, where any small 13-year-old child in Timbuktu can be a profitable entrepreneur in the agora, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Max, I can't let you go without asking you this question, and I've been spending a lot of time on it lately, probably too much. But given that you've thought so deeply about these things and you're so involved in all of this, touched on it, half an hour ago in this conversation. But what's your impression or thoughts, or to what do you attribute the seeming influence on behavior that being involved in Bitcoin and going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole seems to have on people? And I don't know if you've noticed this, but just in a lot of I've been talking with a lot of um, unknown quote unquote Bitcoiners, on Twitter and stuff, and doing podcasts with them, and I'm getting this consistent narrative of these very similar and fairly dramatic either life turnarounds or just kind of uh, refinements in behavior in people's lives since they've gotten involved in Bitcoin. And I don't think it's just a result of, mixing it up on Twitter and being influenced by whatever's going down there. I think it's deeper than that, but I was just wondering if you had noticed that and what your thoughts on why that might be occurring are.
It's super interesting for sure, right? Because I agree that it is just such a huge overlap, and I think there are many angles to it. So I think first and foremost, individuals have problems and they try to find solutions for it. And I think that many saw problems in the existing fiat system. Specifically those who understand economics, or those who just have a half of a brain and a minor ability to reason, will eventually find out that the fiat system is a scam. Um, and so they were looking for a solution. And at that point where you see there's a problem, but you have not yet found the solution, that's quite devastating, right? That's really depressive. And then eventually you discover Bitcoin, which opens up to be that genius solution to exactly that problem that you saw. And I think that it in and of itself is such a positive, a positive change of scenarios. Like, you were completely devastated because you just had no clue what to do in the situation. All of a sudden you find magical unfuckwithable cyberspace money, Bitcoin, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. So this kind of gives you this boost, this lift, this push of adrenaline to keep going, right, and to do something. So I think that this is one of the important aspects. But I think another nice point of view is that you actually feel a noticeable difference when using Bitcoin. Um, the more you fall down the rabbit hole, the more you learn about this. Specifically, the more you earn Bitcoin and the more you hold Bitcoin, you y- again, if you hold fiat shit, if you demand to be paid in fiat, you're being stolen from. Like 90+% every year of everything that you own is being taken from you, right? And you might not even realize that in quantitative numbers how large that extent is, but it's happening, right? And your energy is just being drained at a rapid rate. So when opting out of that and when holding fiat, when holding Bitcoin and demanding to be paid in Bitcoin, this just means that all of a sudden 95% of taxation of theft is gone, right? And all of a sudden all of your capital is yours. Nobody can take it from you. And and you see that instant, like, huge improvement from your being fucked 24/7 and raped pretty hardcore to all of a sudden you are in this unfuckable citadel with basically an army protecting your property. And it's this instant thing of just demanding to be paid in Bitcoin and holding your savings in Bitcoin. And it's such a major improvement. And individuals realize that, right? You realize that it's a much better situation than it was before, and that it has the potential to become even more greater than that. And I think this is then what just gives that passion and that continuous fire, because we see that it works, and we're like Galileo, look through the looking glass. It, like, this works. This is a solution to so many of our problems. And if you use it, you will be more prosperous and more productive and more healthy. And this is, I think, why it is such a thriving, such a compelling industry to be in.
Yeah, maybe it's just like that. And you described it perfectly when you get that jolt, like when you first start using and holding Bitcoin and you kind of realize the change dynamic of your capital and your wealth. And yeah, you get that jolt of empowerment, right? And maybe
Yeah, yeah.
the momentum of that just carries you through to being like, well, where else am I detracting from this sense of empowerment I'm now feeling, right? What else is kind of holding me back or holding me down, and what can I do to rectify that? And
Yeah,
perhaps that's,
absolutely.
yeah, perhaps that's what just makes people kind of go through their life and say, well, everything's on the chopping block now. I got to look into all
Yeah,
this, and they find those things that might be not instilling in them a similar sense or any sense of empowerment, and they may
yeah.
just say, okay, well, this needs to be changed, and they find a solution, and maybe we're just coalescing on common solutions that seem to be effective at instilling a greater sense of empowerment in whatever domain we're addressing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a bit similar to when an individual first shoots a gun, right? Specifically a powerful one, like big caliber, right? That's really forceful. And all of a sudden you realize the huge power that you have, right? And the force that you can apply and the extent that you can manifest change, like to the drastic extent of being able to kill very effectively with such a tool, right? And to actually have that power and to be able to do that and to go completely crazy, right? To understand that ability and that responsibility that comes with that, I think is to a similar degree, right? So many people after they shot for the first time at a shooting range, they're thrilled and they want to do it again because it's liberating, right? You realize the power that you have and that sovereignty, that aspect to defend yourself. Um, but it's also scary because you realize that you have that power to do evil, quote unquote, right? To be aggressive,
Mm.
to harm others, and to be destructive and to destroy capital. So this potential comes hand in hand, right? Freedom has that responsibility of your action. If you do a positive action, you reap the rewards, but if you do a negative action, you carry the full consequences. So this is why it's both liberating and scary. And this is what I meant earlier. I think there is a subsection of individuals who thrive in that environment of huge adrenaline, of that realization of individual liberty, and they're willing to take on the responsibility that this entails. And these are these individuals fighting for liberties. And then there's the other, or like there's a other group of society where they don't necessarily want to have that thrill and that excitement, and specifically they don't want to have that responsibility that comes with it. Right? It's very expensive. If you fuck up, you carry the consequences. Right? If you fuck up, you die. Basically, if you produce something wrong and you don't have enough food for the next year, you're not going to survive the winter, and that is very scary. And I think multiple individuals will not take that trade-off and this risk assessment, and therefore not strive for that freedom and that sovereignty.
Yeah, you just mentioned something. I've been listening to Jordan Peterson's biblical series podcast when I go
Oh,
out
they're
for
great, by the way.
runs and stuff. Yeah, they really are. And one I tweeted about just right before we hopped on the call today was, he says there's some real utility in knowing that you're a monster. And
Yeah.
I think you touched on, you said it beautifully just then on what that is. And of course, anyone who's interested, he breaks into it in a lot more detail in those lectures, and I highly recommend listening to them because yeah, there's a lot of great wisdom and insight that he extracts from those
Yeah,
texts.
absolutely. And specifically, one book that I discovered through Peterson, and I'm super grateful that I read it, was the Gulag Archipelago
I'm
from
reading it
by
now.
Solzhenitsyn. Oh man, that's such a powerful book.
Yeah.
It's a horror story, seriously, because you understand just in such a depth and in so many pages of so well written content, you just realize, first of all, the evil that socialism and communism is, and that the evil that manifests in individuals who get caught up by this idea, and the extent of the evil that they are willing to do, by being blinded by that ideology and mindset. And then, as you said, right, realizing that this could be you, that you
Mm.
could have made all of these choices, that this is absolutely understandable why individuals were like tyrannizing others and torturing them in the most serene situations. But to understand the capacity to do that, and what, like, to have that ability, again, that power in yourself, you could become a tremendous tyrant and ruin the life of hundreds of thousands of people, very effectively, probably, if you apply your will to it.
Mm.
And that is a potential. That is one of the potential scenarios that you can manifest if you put your capital and your time and your attention into it. Um, and again, to realize that this is an option and that this is a potential option that you could actually manifest is extremely scary, right? And this is why I'm so like rigorous in the analysis of my first principles and my methodological approach and these assumptions and the logical reasoning on top. Because if I don't have that, right, if there's a flaw in my reasoning, in my point of view, then I am absolutely capable to manifest something devastating in this world. And that is something that I don't want to carry the karma and the responsibility for.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it also, I think it enhances value of your expression of good also, like not in just as a means of avoiding your own expression of those, like, horrendous or monstrous behavior, but knowing that you can and still choosing to be good.
Yes.
I think that increases the value of it so much more, and probably a lot of other things too that I'm just not thinking of. But I mean, as they explain, or I can't remember if it's actually Peterson that explained, I'm sure he did at some point, but if you're just kind of by default good, it's your cultural conditioning, it's your familial conditioning, whatever, then that's wonderful, but it's not tested. And if it's not balanced with kind of your recognition of the monstrous inside of you, then it's almost like it's less of a conscious decision. And I think it's good that you recognize the monster inside of you, not only so that you know how to tame it and not let it get out of control and have it make you do all those horrendous things you just articulated, but that you know that you're making the good and right decisions in spite of it, and that maybe makes it more valuable, enhances your conviction, something like that around your expression of good.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And again, when you realize that you're actually powerful, that you can actually
Right.
manifest change, that you can actually create this universe with every action, um, this is very empowering. And yes, it is scary because it comes with that responsibility of what do you do? Again, what do you want to manifest? What do you want to build? What is
Mm,
this most important thing that you focus your time and your capital? Um, and again, this is such a difficult question precisely because of this. And if you fuck up that question, if you make a misjudgment in this question and trying to answer it and trying to apply that strategy that you come up with, then again you carry the responsibilities. And if your actions are destructive, then you will suffer from the long-term results of this
yeah.
inevitably, always.
And even on that deeper philosophical level that you keep referring to, which I love, it's like you can't have creation without destruction, right? You want to make a chair, you got to cut down a tree. You want to. It's always this cause and effect relationship, and I think it's important to recognize that if you're going to be creating something, you're necessarily probably going to be destroying something. And so having a handle on both of those forces within you is probably the most balanced and most, I guess, advisable or beneficial way to go about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are two nice ways where you can see that destruction actually going on. So first of all is a destruction of potential, right? So the future is uncertain. It's black. There's a lot of uneasiness, a lot of darkness, and not we're not sure how it actually will play out because there's so many variables that we just cannot control. And so that is that aspect of seeing multiple scenarios. There is not just one clear vision of how the future is, but there are multiple, right? You could eat a steak, or you could eat ribs, or you could eat bone marrow, right? All of those three are delicious options. Which of these will you take, right? So there's multiple potentials, and then the aspect of choice is the aspect of destroying everything but one,
Right.
right? All of these other options are being obliterated. They never like they, you out of that creative spark that you have as an individual, you dampen it down, you decrease that potential, and you remove all the entropy that could have been by only manifesting that one highest, most profitable, and most subjectively valuable task that you're doing right now. So this is one side of the destruction, to walk out into the unknown, to venture out into that sea of darkness. And that other aspect is to manifest change, right? Action is change. You are in a state of uneasiness. You venture out into different opportunities and you grab the one that is most important and most meaningful, and you act. And that current situation is no longer, and a new situation has manifested. And that aspect of change, that the old is gone and that it will never come back, and that is lost, a moment in time lost forever in that past. Um, and that aspect of destruction is the other. And that is, of course, also difficult, right? To let go of the things that have been, of the things that just are as like this is what it is, and the past is, and it will not change. And that second aspect that once something has changed, the original state is destroyed and cannot be reached backwards, is that other aspect of human action.
Mm. And kind of what we were talking about earlier about primary motivations for action is, as you were saying, like when you have three things in your mind or four things in your mind and you decide to focus on one and kind of destroy the focus on the other ones as concepts in your mind. It makes me think of kind of really getting down to, well, that's one of the good questions, is what is the underlying motive for what you destroy and what you create, right? Whether, even if it's just an idea, right? If you're just a matter of what you're focusing on in terms of abstraction in your mind, it's like, what's the principle within you that's determining what gets created and what gets destroyed? I don't know if I don't think there's a singular answer to that question, but I think it's, again, one what we all probably ought to ask ourselves frequently, maybe. Why are we deciding to hold these things and let go of these things?
Yes, exactly. And this is kind of where praxeology ends. Praxeology is the science of finding the causal relations between means and ends. However, that aspect does not talk about what end to choose. Right? Praxeology is a science of what happens when you choose an end and you try to reach it. But the question of what end to choose, what of the many potentials to do, is something that is not possible to reason with in the science,
Mm.
because again, it is based on individuality, and these value judgments are subjective, and these preferences are unique to every individual, and this is one of these core aspects, but it's still, despite it not being part of the praxeological science, it's still such an important question, right? Like, why do you actually act? Why? What is the ultimate end? The end that is no longer a means, right? So for example, like you're hungry and you want to eat, so that state of not being hungry anymore after you've eaten the steak, that is the goal, but that is not your end goal, right? But rather you eat the steak so that you can live on for another day, right, and be more productive. So the short-term end goal of being not hungry is not the ultimate goal, not the ultimate end that the individual strives for.
Mm.
But it's so difficult to find that question of what ultimately do you want to do.
Amen. All right, Max. Last one for you, and we might be circling back a bit here, but I wanted to ask you because it's very much related to the question about that we were talking about Bitcoin and kind of this inspired behavior change, and I think we actually did a pretty good justice in our little exchange about it. But Robert Breedlove, in his recent article "Masters and Slaves," which I thought was a great piece, "Masters and Slaves of Money," rather. Um, he invokes the idea of the alchemist's incorruptible substance and relates that to Bitcoin. And if that were if we kind of accept that premise, then it stands to reason that such a substance would naturally kind of have many transformative effects on the people that engaged with it, because
Mhm.
basically, if it's incorruptible, that by default that means the person engaging with it's going to have to change, not the substance itself,
Yeah.
rather than maybe a more natural back and forth between object and subject in any relationship where both can change. Maybe there's always some, well, as we've been saying this whole conversation, there's kind of cause and effect, that relationship where both are always change and always transform. If we have this kind of incorruptible substance, maybe that imposes the necessity for change and transformation on the subject rather than the object. And maybe that's part of the reason why we see these changes being inspired in people that engage with Bitcoin. I'm just wondering if you had thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, that's super, super interesting. And then it for sure resonates true to a certain extent. But Bitcoin really is this incorruptible, pure asset, right? It is pure information, and it was very beautifully and logically defined in 2008 and 9 by Satoshi. And since then, these The assumptions of the protocol, as well as its logical implementations, have not been broken, and we're still in consensus. And this is just beautiful if you think about it. So that you're right? You're not going to change Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's going to change you, and that might really be one of these reasons why individuals who are curious about the technology and involved in building in the space are experiencing such a monumental shift in their mindset and in their actions, that is for sure very compelling. Um, and again, I think this is so true because Bitcoin is so sound on its theoretical foundations. Like the first principles of the technology are so solid, and it is implemented to a pure and true extent. And I think that's just one of the many reasons why it is such a monumental and breathtaking technology that devours the attention of so many individuals. Um,
Yeah, you got that right. Well, Max, as expected, this has been a really enjoyable conversation. I'm sure we could go for hours, and I hope one day in the not too distant future we will meet in meet space and actually set out a big chunk of time and just have a few drinks and keep going on this discussion. But for
oh
now,
yes.
I'll let you get back to your life. Do you want to just mention again the details for the Congress this weekend for anyone who's interested?
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of philosophy and but also a lot of applied strategies, and think if the listeners really enjoyed that conversation, they will also enjoy the Hackers Congress quite a lot, because for me it was always that nice junction of beautiful philosophy and radical thinking together with applied theories and actual liberation strategies that individuals can use today. So the Hackers Congress, the seventh annual, with the theme digital totality, that could not be any more fitting than it is in 2020. The tyranny that is manifesting in this year is to such a shocking extent, and the technologies of cyberspace that these pirates are using now are extremely effective and absolutely dangerous. So that we really do need to defend ourselves to a large extent. And the Hackers Congress is a place where it's not just going to be about the philosophy and the theory, but it will also be especially about learning these tools and how to use them properly. And this is why I'm so excited about the Hackers Congress, and where I'm so happily, yeah, contributing now with helping out to organize it. Um, and again, these tickets to the event platform and the three stages with the workshops are available at hcpp.zz, of course, with a self-hosted BTC Pay server, accepting Bitcoin payments both on-chain and over Lightning, as it should be. And yeah, John, good news for all your awesome listeners, because they can get a 50% discount code, which is a substantial amount of SAT
Wow.
saving on both the cyberspace stages as well as the workshops. So that the discount code is John Vallis, just the name of the podcast. Or no, wait, the name of the podcast is Rapid Fire, actually.
Bitcoin
But the
Rapid
name
Fire.
of the beautiful host is John.
Okay, so the discount code is all one word, John Ballas.
Precisely, yes, and
Okay, okay.
50% of the tickets.
Wow, that is awesome. Thank you guys very much for that amazing offer. And I was looking at the workshop list and the speaker list, and it looks incredible. You're doing a workshop, I think on privacy and uh,
Um,
is it
I have two workshops. The first is on how to earn and live on Bitcoin.
right,
So
right,
praxeological entrepreneurial strategies to stack more sats, basically. And the other is applied Bitcoin privacy.
right,
So basically how to use a full stack of Bitcoin weapons effectively and privately.
man.
And then my talk on stage will be a bit more philosophical than applied. The title is "I, the Individual, Exist," and it is a analysis starting on that first principle of individual action and seeing where we can go with this one assumption.
Wow. Dude, these as much as I love these conversations, not I mean, they just don't do this type of discussion justice. I need to be, around a table looking at you, and we need to be having this conversation over, perhaps several beers, but for the time being it'll have to suffice. So, man, it's always a pleasure. Really appreciate you coming on, and really hope the Congress goes well. It looks like a really awesome event, and I wish, unfortunately, I can't be involved this time, but hopefully next time.
Yeah, I've really would have been loved to have you on at the HCPP TV, which is one of the crazy side projects at the Congress, like a 58-hour nonstop live stream.
It's amazing.
It's kind of ridiculous with 30 plus amazing Bitcoin podcasters to co-host. So I know your scheduling is tight, yeah, maybe we can see you spontaneously or anytime then again in the future to just talk more about these themes because it's just that important information to share.
Yeah,
Uh, so so
I couldn't agree more, man. It would be awesome to participate in anything around this stuff at some point.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So again, thanks, John, very much for the invitation. That really was a great conversation, as usual and as expected with you. Really prosperous and thriving. Thanks again, and looking forward to come on to the next show again.
Absolutely, Max. My pleasure, man. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too. Bye bye,
Okay.
John.
Bye bye.